6:30. I really want to honor your time, so we are going to get started on State of the Streets presentation. My name is Emily, and I get to work with you as mayor here in the city, and it is a pleasure and a privilege and an honor to do that with you. Thank you for being here tonight to learn about the state of our streets and the idea of what's before you for the ballot question of the referendum, the dedicated sales tax for streets. So we're going to cover a lot of ground tonight. Thank you to Jeff Cox, who is the mayor of the community club here, for opening the doors. There's coffee back there. There is a restroom around the corner. And I'm going to have Jim Benning introduce himself and his role. Paku Lee is here with the city. She does our communications. And then we also have Councilor Gary Anderson here as a resident and here to hear the presentation. So our goal today is to provide you with some information so that you feel educated on what you feel is the right vote for you on November 7th or any time before that, because we are doing early voting. And we will present, we have a series of slides we're going to present, and then it'll just be a discussion. You can ask questions as we go along, or you can hold your questions till the end. We have this set from 6:30 to 8, but this isn't going to last that long. So don't worry about that. So we will keep our piece moving fairly quickly. So Jim, do you want to introduce yourself and then we'll get started?
Hi, I'm Jim Benning, Public Works Utilities Director and fellow Lakeside resident. So I only got to travel 5 minutes to get here today compared to usually 10-15 minutes.
Yeah,
welcome.
The question is, how are the roads?
How are the roads?
Yeah.
So we're talking about?
Yeah.
Good shepherd.
Okay, so this is State of the Streets, and we will get started. In 2015, we did a survey, the American Community Survey with the City of Duluth. 91% of you shared with us, the City of Duluth, that you lack confidence in our streets. And I actually think, that was a few years ago. I think if we did that survey again, that number would be higher. You have been very clear that you are frustrated with our streets program, that we aren't meeting your needs, that we aren't proving ourselves as a reliable city in this area. And it's not a secret that our roads are bad. You have been very clear with me, very consistent. This is by far the #1 priority I hear from you, is the condition of our roads and our sidewalks and your frustration about your potholes. So we have a way that we actually measure our roads. Jim can talk about that a little bit when he takes a turn, but we know that 55% of our roads are in poor condition. And we rate them on a pavement condition index. That is an industry standard by which people at communities measure their roads. And you generally get a score between 1 and 100 on that pavement condition index. Great, okay, thank you. So generally you score between 1 and 100 every street in town. A city wants to be somewhere around 70 for their roads. The City of Duluth, our average is 36. So that's a pavement condition index. You can take that measurement and bring it to another city that is the industry standard. The current status of our streets, we have 450 miles of streets in the City of Duluth that we are responsible for. We have 400 miles of sidewalk, and we are making, I don't know if you've noticed, but we're making slow progress on getting that done. We currently do about 3.5 miles of road per year, and that gets broken down into 2 buckets. We do reconstruction, and we get about 0.3 miles of reconstruction done annually. Reconstruction is when we tear down and we go all the way down. We do the utilities, we address everything. It is a full reconstruct. 4th Street was partly a reconstruct, not our reconstruct, that was a St. Louis County project, but that might be one you're familiar with. And then we do 3.2 miles of reconditioning, and the reconditioning is, Jim will speak a little bit more about it, but it's really the light work where we mill and overlay, we chop off the top layer, we crush it back down, we give it a smooth coating. And the reason why we only do 0.3 miles of this and 3.2 miles of this is cost. And you'll hear a little bit more about that. We know that every season that we delay construction, things just get costlier, they get more expensive and more expensive, and we need to do better. This is, as I said, the number one concern I hear from you. I hear it every day. I hear it from tourists. I hear it from people who are frustrated. They're finding new routes to go to work. They are choosing the neighborhood they want to live in based on the condition of the road. And truthfully, I find it as a mayor really embarrassing, our road conditions. And we need to do better with you and for you, and I believe we can. So to meet all of our current needs, we actually have a designated streets plan, and I can talk through a little bit of the handouts at the back. We may have a few copies of the plan. It's pretty thick. It really outlines every single thing we need to do for roads, bridges, and sidewalks. And the total need is $446 million. So we're not getting there at the rate we're going right now. You want to talk through cost, Jim?
Costs.
Sure.
Okay. Cost for roads, very expensive. $2.5 million per mile for reconstruction. And a local example of a reconstruction is when Glenwood was done a number of years ago. That was full reconstruction, utilities were done, new curb and gutter, new sidewalk, $2.5 million per mile. We currently have 174 miles that would need to be reconstructed. Reconditioning, $600,000 to $700,000 per mile. A local example of reconditioning is, if everybody remembers, for those of you who live in the neighborhood, Upper Glenwood, where we went up the hill. It was a relatively quick project. Milled it down, made it a little narrow. It used to be 4 lanes, now it's 3. That's a reconditioning project. That's about a quarter of the price. We typically don't do utilities. We may do some sidewalks, minor sidewalk repairs, and a little bit of curb and gutter, but it's mainly just a new driving surface. And then finally, we have pavement preservation. That's typically done by city crews. That's crack sealing, chip sealing. You can see that done on the streets that were done previously in Lakeside. That a couple of years later, after they built, you get a crack now and then. They'll come by and they'll seal that up, and that prevents water from going in there and popping it out. What's kind of interesting on the full reconstruct, for those of you that have lived in the neighborhood for 10 years or more so, there was a project every single year we were doing in Lakeside where it was getting fully reconstructed. And we kind of worked our way down the hill, and then about 8 years ago it just stopped. And what the mayor's proposing is getting us to a point where we're going to be able to have one of those projects, full reconstruction project, in this neighborhood and other neighborhoods throughout Duluth, so we can get these in good condition. So all we're doing is pavement preservation into the future. So can you just kind of click through there we go.
I got just a quick question on that.
Sure.
Slide. The first reconstruct, is that concrete or is that just asphalt? So are all 3 of these asphalt?
The question was whether this was asphalt or concrete. 90% of the time it's going to be asphalt.
So full reconstruct is just going to be, because the last 2 are definitely asphalt.
Asphalt. And the majority of our concrete streets are municipal state aid, which means that we do get help from the state for those, and those are our busier streets. And that price is going to be more than $2.5 million per mile. It's a good question. Now we'll move into the scary engineering slide here. So what this shows is the pavement condition over time. So grades, we build it year 0, we build it as an excellence shape. As time goes on, around 15 years, you can see that if we do nothing, this really tapers off and we get into this poor condition. So what we want to do is take the streets that need to be reconstructed down here, get them up into this good condition, and then that preservation I talked about, that $100,000 per mile, that's what this shows. And what we do is keep bumping this along, and what we've seen is that we get a 7 to 1 rate of return on our investment up there. So it's important to note that in this case, we're taking these, we're reconditioning them, bringing back to here. What our intent is to get everything up here and keep it up there with preservation. Doing nothing, moving forward, if we do nothing, this street, this red is going to get bigger and bigger. And this is that red, and that's the $2.5 million per mile. We don't want that number to get any bigger. The intent is to make that number smaller and invest in preservation at $100,000 per mile.
Great.
You're nuts?
Oh, okay, so why not? So I do just want to go back to this. Sometimes I get questions, I hear from you a lot on the streets, which is actually great, and I appreciate it when you reach out. And sometimes I get those questions about, I can't believe you're doing this street again, when this street over here hasn't been touched and needs to get done. That's exactly what we're doing here, is trying to extend that initial investment and make it last longer. And what starts happening here is when we start getting a lot of cracks and water in the road, things start eroding very, very quickly underneath. And so what we try to do is just stretch that out as long as we can. But I hope that answers some of your question, because I get that a lot from people. So why now? Some of you may say, why not before? And I can tell you why we're thinking about this now. A clear reflection of your priorities and your concerns and your frustrations, because of your property values, because I know and I'm hearing from business owners and residents that they are determining the amount of investment they want to make in their properties based on how they feel the city is taking care of the infrastructure around them. And when people aren't seeing that the city is stepping up and doing our part, it makes people feel like they don't want to do theirs. Car repairs and inconvenience. We actually know the American Society of Civil Engineers did a study of the infrastructure of America, and they did bridges and roads and all sorts of different things. But they found that roads, they gave the roads of America a D+, based on all of the factors that they looked at. But they specifically looked at the state of Minnesota. And what they found is that the average driver spends $480 a year on car repairs that are based on poor roads. So they have their own metrics by which they measure that, but we know that this is getting costly for you in a variety of ways. Our annual dedicated funding is simply inadequate, and I will talk about that a little bit further on. Currently, we have $2.8 million that we are working with. And of that $2.8 million, 1.3 of it is paying down old street debt. The old stuff. It's probably paying for streets that need to be redone again. We used to have a strategy where we bonded for streets, which is essentially like taking out a mortgage. And then we made decisions to bond again and bond further. And we made so many decisions around bonding, it's kind of like mortgaging your home. You can get a first mortgage and maybe a second, but you're not going to get a third, fourth, and fifth mortgage. So the value of continuing to bond and incur debt for streets was no longer a value, and we could no longer get value out of it. But our annual dedicated funding right now is just simply inadequate. I'm doing this now and bringing this forward now because of economic development, because we have projects like Bluestone, we have projects like Pier B, amazing developers who are pouring in their heart and their dedication and millions of dollars into our economy. And they're doing it on roads that are horrible and are not matching that. And so we have a $32 million hotel development down at Pier B on Railroad Street. And if you haven't driven that, you'll be horrified to think that this is the front door of our community, that we're asking tourists to come in and come back and stay with us. And that's the level of investment that we're showing. Because our current system, as I've said, is embarrassing to me personally. I think it's embarrassing for our community, but it's also really reactionary. So you will get quick action from us if we have a water main break and we have to go in and fix that street. If you have a pothole that needs emergency patching, we can do that. We do that well. But we aren't getting to the stuff that's preventing it. And we aren't getting to the lower grade, less emergency, because we are so stuck in being reactionary to the big issues that we have. We have staff that know what they're doing. They actually do their job really well. We're not giving them enough money to work with. And so what's happening is that we are investing in these very short-term projects, pulling people off the site so they can get to the next emergency. And I'm proud, actually, of our staff. They do great work. and they do know what we're doing. Some of this work that we project would be done by staff, and a lot of it would be contracted out the way we do now. So it would be both with in-house and working with local contractors. This line down here just says proposed 2018 budget provides $1 million more for streets. So I just mentioned that currently we spend $2.8 million on streets. Next year my budget proposes that we would spend $3.8 million on streets. And finding that money this year was really hard. If you tracked the budget process at all, some people do, some people don't, you will know that we made cuts to every single division that we have in the city. Because it was clear to me that you needed to see that streets can be a financial priority with the resources that we have. But I also needed you to see how hard it is for us to get there. And at a certain point, you also need me to be able to get you your construction permit on time. And you need us to be able to inspect your building on time and do the other things. So we cut really to our core to generate that additional $1 million more. This is my favorite slide, and you don't really, I mean, it's probably in your packet. What's down here describes a little bit, but what I want you to really just note are just these bar graphs. This is what our streets funding has been for the last 10 years. This is 2006, and this is 2017. And this is actually, I like this graph because to me this is what our streets look like. They look inconsistent, they look up and down, they look chaotic, because it is. All of those things. In the last 10 years, we have had 4 different ways to pay for streets. I talked about the bonding, which is taking out debt, so you see that there. Some of this is community investment trust dollars that were intended to be used for one purpose and then also used in the end for streets. And that was part of the dedicated use, but we used some of those dedicated dollars. Here's where we dropped off and we went to a fee-based system. Do you remember the really popular $5 monthly fee for your streets? That's what that was there. And then we made the decision to flip that fee into your property tax last year because that was more equitable. In a property tax system, people pay proportional to what their income and their property value is, what their property is, not their income. So we switched that over to the property tax. So this is the funding we have for this year. This is $2.8 million. That $1 million that I'm proposing for next year takes us from this bar to that bar. And it hurt our city to do that. Very, very difficult decisions we had to make internally and all of those cuts that we talked about. This is what it looks like with the proposed dedicated 0.5% sales tax. We would continue to dedicate the resources that we have right now. These are dedicated street dollars. I don't use them for anything else. We have dedicated them only for streets. We would continue that dedication, and we would add into that the $7 million we believe that this 0.5% dedicated sales tax would generate. So we would immediately go from $3 million to $10 million. And here's why I chose this formula. Here's why we chose this formula. I promised in my State of the City this spring that I would bring forward a streets plan this fall. And we spent all year going over our options, and I will talk a little bit later about what alternative options are, just so you feel fully educated on what your options are. And this is why we brought forward a sales tax proposal, because it is a shared solution. Duluth has 86,000 residents, and every single day we have 35,000 commuters who come in. We are a regional center, and it is wonderful. We get to provide people's health care, and we get to be people's international airport and where they come to go shopping and where they come for education. That is a gift. But we have a built environment that has to provide services to all of those residents. Our 86,000 residents, our 35,000 daily commuters, and our 6.7 million tourists. Our tourists have doubled in the last 10 years. And that's great too, because they activate our community at times of the year that we really benefit. But again, we have an entire environment and built system, street system, and infrastructure system to serve all of this. And I think that ensuring that all of those users are paying into the system is actually the most fair and equitable approach for you and for us. Yep.
You know, I hear some of what you're saying.
Yep.
But I also, there's things in here that says the commuters and the tourists use the main arteries and the main streets. And those streets, many times, are paid for by the state. And I can go through some numbers at some point. So I guess what I'm getting at is that what you're fixing residential streets. The main arteries and the main corridors coming in are either county or state. So your numbers don't add up.
Yeah. Okay, so can I repeat your statement?
Yeah, that's fine.
So he believes the numbers don't add up in a way that support this approach. And I want to share what his comment was so you can hear it. If our commuters and our tourists are only using main roads, and if many of those main roads can be paid for by those state dollars that Jim mentioned, then why should they be paying into the residential streets? And here's my answer to that. First of all, the state dollars that we get, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, it actually isn't enough to do the mileage for those main roads. Okay, so it's about
$3.5 million.
a year. And how many miles is it? 150 of those miles?
It's 110.
Yeah. So actually the math of what we get from the state to provide services and the needs for those main roads actually those numbers don't match either, right? And then second of all, we also know that while people are using main roads, they're not only using main roads. They are often,
Mainly.
yeah, they could be, in which case they're paying for the entire system of the regional center that they're benefiting from. So it just may be a different way that we're looking at that information. So here are the referendum details of what's ahead and what is on the ballot with you. It's a 0.5% sales tax, and what that means is it is 2 cents on $4, right? If you go and you spend $4 on coffee or $4 on something that's taxable at a coffee shop, you're going to pay 2 cents, and that's going to be fully dedicated for a streets plan. And I want to talk about dedication because this is one of the big questions I get. How will I know it's actually dedicated? How will I know that you won't go in or somebody else won't go in and raid those dollars for something else? There are 2 ways this will be dedicated. The first is through our own legal system. So the city of Duluth would do what we call an ordinance, which is a law. And that's one way we would do it. But the second way, and actually the most important way, is that this would need to be approved by the legislature. And the legislature would absolutely lock in that dedication. There is no question about that. They have done transportation sales tax for other cities, for other communities, for other counties. And it is very clear. There is no going outside of that. It would be illegal to do that. There is no council action that could be taken to undo that. There is no mayor's action that could be taken to undo that. That would be only legislative. We believe it would generate $7 million annually, bringing what we are spending currently up to $10 million. So it would be 3 times more funding. We believe it would help us be more reliable. It would help us be more coordinated. We would be able to work closely with St. Louis County. They do road projects through their transportation sales tax. They have invested $16 million on county roads in the city of Duluth in the last 3 years. During that period, the city of Duluth has invested $5 million. If we didn't have the county, you wouldn't be seeing a lot of the road projects. They have been a terrific partner in getting mileage done for us and for you. And we would actually be able to coordinate around those projects. So when they're doing a big project like Woodland Avenue or 4th Street, we can actually do some of the area around it, right? So we don't have to come back and re-inconvenience people. And right now, they'll call us and say, we have this road on our plans, can you help us extend the project? And we spend days, literally days, trying to find money so we can be a good partner and be reliable for you. It would also help us when utilities come in, whether it's Minnesota Power or our own water utilities or our comfort systems, to be able to address everything at once so we don't have to come back. The proposal will sunset up to 25 years, and this is really, really important. This is not a strategy that I am suggesting is going to be the only one forever. So we are actually proposing that it does sunset. It could be that other tools become more available. It could be that the state and federal government wants to find a way to help cities do their streets. I don't know if that's the case. I think if state and federal government are going to come up with transportation bills, they're likely to prioritize state highways and state bridges and things like that. But I think that's important for you to know. The commitment is there that we will work hard to find every strategy that we can. It would be legislative. After this, should the public support it, I have to go down and work with the legislature and get it passed there. And we are already working on that. So we're working with commissioners of revenue and tax. We are working with the governor's office. We're working with the House and Senate, both parties. We're writing the language. We're getting it ready, and we think we can be successful with it. But my favorite part about this plan is that you get to tell me what to do. I know how I'm going to vote, but my vote is just as powerful as yours. So on November 7th or before, you are the ones who decide. You've been the ones telling me you want a plan. This is what I've proposed, and you get to tell me if you think it's the right one. You want to talk about how we would spend the money?
Sure. If I can, I'd like to expand a little bit on this gentleman's question. So we get 3 pots of money generally to pay for our streets. We do get some federal money. We get about $1 million a year. That's not a lot. Coming up, we're going to do a little bit on Railroad Street. We're going to do Decker Road. And next year, we're going to do 8th and 9th. And those are just going to be reclamation. So that's $1 million we get from the federal government. From the state government, we get about $5 million annually. And that comes from the state's gas tax. But that money can only be used on municipal state aid roads. All right, what is a municipal state aid road? That's 20% of our system that we get to designate as our larger, higher capacity roads. And in the Lakeside Lester Park neighborhood, that's 43rd, 45th, 47th, 52nd, and 60th. And you can usually tell because it's got a center line painted down it. Those are municipal state aid roads. People drive them because they're stopped and you get to go up and down, without having to worry about getting run into somebody for the most part. And then the rest of the streets, everything else, all of the streets that go east and west and lakeside, that's what's going to be paid for by these funds, because there is no other funding source.
That's not really true. How about East 4th Street? That runs east and west, and that's a county.
East 4th Street, that's a good point. There are streets located within the city limits that are not maintained by the city of Duluth.
Okay, but what I'm trying to do, and I'm not trying to argue with you, but you're saying 450 miles of road.
That we've maintained.
Oh, wait a minute, now, right in your plan here, it says 20% gets the state aid.
Correct.
So if you take the 20% out, that knocks it down to 360 miles that you're responsible for.
Correct, but that doesn't...
Okay, and then if you take and go back down to the 55% that the mayor says is unacceptable, we're down to 198 miles. So your numbers do not... So the other point that I would make is that in your projection here, you want to do 452 miles of work. That's more than what you take care of right now.
Yes.
I mean, it's right here. So under your deal.
Can we go through this after?
Well, we can, but I think that's
an important point. Out of the state, out of that 20%, that $3.5 million, we plan on using some of this money for that street, those streets also, because that $3.5 million for our busier streets isn't enough to do that. So we have to dedicate some of this money that's going to come from this referendum to do those municipal state aid streets also. Yes, sir.
Did you say you needed 400 million total? 446?
Yep.
Correct.
25 years times 10 is 250. Where's the other?
Yep.
We're trying to do what people can afford to do. We know this isn't the perfect solution, but it has to be something that we can accept and sustain, that's going to be, that we can do the best we can with what we have. And that's to get, that 446, that's to get everything from a grade of 36 up to about a 70.
But there are some streets in the city of Duluth, one in particular, Condon Parkway, which goes from Superior Street to First Street by the creek. It's a waste of money to even fix that street.
That's not, well, let's get right into our priority criteria. So, well, you had a question, yes ma'am?
I have an easy one, I hope.
Okay.
The 2.6 million that you mentioned that you use per year on the street, that 1 million you mentioned you get from federal, is that part of that 2.6?
No.
So it's really, okay.
So annually, we would get about $1 million for federal projects. We get about $3.5 million for construction for our municipal state aid streets. And then out of the 2.8 that we have currently, with 1.3 of that goes for payoff bond, we've got about $1.5 million for our local streets.
Then I have one other question. During the flood, up on top of Hawthorne, there's a road that had been recently reconstructed and it was washed away. Did you get any kind of guarantee from the people that built those streets, or do we get a guarantee?
Our new streets they're under a warranty for 1 year after we accept them.
1 year?
1 year. But the flood, it wasn't because that road was built poorly. That was a flood. That was a 500-year event, and that was one example of many where things just washed away. It was inundated. We don't design for a 500-year event. Our storm sewer systems would be gigantic, and we'd have a catch basin every 5 feet.
Yeah,
So it wasn't a failure of the road. It was a failure of the road. It wasn't a failure of the design.
Okay. Is a 1 year guarantee typical for
Yes.
something that expensive?
But while they're guaranteed for 1 year, we do have inspectors out there on a daily basis, hourly basis, watching everything they do to make sure it's done to our standards also. So prioritization, the two biggies that I want to touch on, pavement condition index, we're obviously going to pick the worst streets for reconstruction. Utilities, when you get poor utilities and poor road, those are the streets that are going to be done first. A complaint that I get a lot is, you just repaved my street and a year later you're digging up the street to fix the broken water main. Why are you doing that? Well, we didn't know it was going to break. But, so our policy going forward is to replace all water mains that are 80 years or older. That may seem like an old age, but 50% of our water mains right now are 80 years or older. So any street that has the old water mains, poor condition, those are the streets that are going to get done first. Some other things, fair investment across the city. We're not going to come in here, I'm not going to make promises that it's all going to be lakeside. We're just going to knock this out. That has to be equitable throughout the city. That's what we did in previous years also. And, alignment with other projects. If we've got economic development projects that are going on, if we're working with the county, Woodland Avenue, for instance, they're going to be doing that in 2019. We're going to do some work in conjunction with them to capitalize the economy of scale type of things. Drainage problems. We do get a lot of problems with the topography in Duluth, creating problems. You mentioned Hawthorne. Stuff like that we want to address, that we know of. We know of certain situations in Duluth that have drainage problems. We want to address those as part of our reconstruction.
Question.
Yes.
Follow up on this gentleman's comment about that street isn't probably worth being constructed. Do you have any process that you're considering for talking with folks in the neighborhoods about which streets perhaps should be abandoned and converted back into green space?
To abandon them? I don't believe we have a formal process for that. It's more of a planning commission, planning department type of event, but that's...
I will say, we're also doing our comprehensive plan, you know, this Imagine Duluth 2035. We actually are having a conversation about, we have especially some more rural roads where there's 1 or 2 homes. So we actually are looking at a policy and conversation about how would we essentially give that street to those neighbors, right? Or find a way.
Yeah.
Because it is very costly to put in a road, and then when we only have 1 or 2 houses on it, we're using a lot of resource that we really need to spread more equitably around the city. So we actually are having that conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I was going to say this for later, but since this is related, question, it is not, my understanding is the city originally, infrastructurally, was designed for about a population of 140, 150,000. And so, similar question, we have a lot of roads that were built intending that we would have a lot more population paying for all this than we actually do.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So I totally support what the gentleman was saying too. We should find in this prioritization roads that can be not have to be maintained at this level of 2 point, you know, or whatever, millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, when you can make them perfectly fine gravel roads in a lot of situations.
Yep.
Our alleys are gravel and they're perfectly fine.
I live on a gravel road in the middle of the city. It's not perfectly fine, but it is passable. It is passable.
It is for the cost.
Yes. Well, and I think so what you brought up is a really good point, and I think let us finish this, because what you're touching on, and it's been interesting, some of these forums, because people want to talk about transportation and street policy, which is a little bit different than funding mechanism, but it really does call the question of, are we going to keep doing the same with what we've got? Or is there a time in which we look at doing things differently? And I can say we are talking about how we can even construct roads differently, and working with the U of M, actually, NRRI, which is one of our research partners, on what are different materials we can try, what are different kind of experiment areas we can see. Are there different materials? Are there less expensive materials? Are there kind of old mining materials we can use? So we actually are talking about all of that. It's a little separate from funding, but so just a little bookmark in it.
I was just bringing that up now because
Yeah.
you brought that up,
Yeah.
and that goes hand in hand with taxing,
Yeah.
which I'm not against taxing for if you need it, but when a lot of people don't understand that this infrastructure was built for almost double the population that we have.
Well, and per person, we actually have a lot more road per person than cities like St. Paul and Minneapolis. I mean, we've done the metrics on that, and I don't have it at the top of my head, but we have about, I think it's a third of the population of St. Paul, but we have almost the same amount of streets as they do. So yes, you're right. The balance is very different for us. It's one of the reasons why a sales tax, in my mind, can make sense. Because I'm gonna go on a little bit here. In the first year, we would get 16 miles of road work done, 5 times the current number of what we're able to do. So we would be able to get these dollars into rotation for you right away. We would coordinate with water and utilities, and overall, we think you would get better streets with this plan. But this is where I actually wanted to go. So these are some of the other options that we have. Because what's important to me, and again, I know how I'm going to vote, but really why I like these meetings is I just want you to have information. And I want you to feel like when you go in, you're going to vote yes or no, you're going to know why, and you're going to know what other options are. So one option is use the money you've got, right? Use your existing resources, find the money, and make it happen. So I talked a little bit about what it took to create $1 million from the existing budget. And it cut every division, including fire and police. And I am unable to provide the kinds of services you need with the existing resources that we have. That is the reality. It is possible, but it will mean some impacts in areas that I'm not sure I'm not getting the message from you that that's what you want me to do. The gas tax comes up a lot because it's a user fee, right? And why don't you look for a local gas tax option? Well, a couple of reasons. The state legislature hasn't increased the gas tax since 1988, or I think maybe they've done it once since 1988. But last year, there's a big fight at the legislature about the gas tax, a big fight between the governor and the legislature about the gas tax. And the gas tax is something we benefit from currently for those state roads that we talked about. I believe, based on the research I've done and the conversations I've had, that if the legislature decides to increase the gas tax, they will do so to continue to meet state needs. I don't think they're going to increase the gas tax so every city can work on their own municipal road systems. And they do not allow a local gas tax. I have not found one around the state. I have found many examples of a dedicated sales tax. Proctor just got one last year. Hermantown is using one. 4 streets. So there's a lot of examples of the legislature allowing local communities to decide if that's a strategy they want to use. The same amount of money, that $7 million that we've been talking about, if we were to simply place that on 86,000 residents, and if we were to do that through a property tax, your taxes would increase 35%. And when we talk about the number of people we have to pay into a system, I don't think that number works for you. I don't think it works in a city. 50% of our community has an income of $50,000 a year or less. I don't think raising your taxes 35% is something that you can sustain. And I don't think it's something that our business community can sustain. Oh, I accidentally did that. And then there's, often people will say, well, the state and federal government hasn't gotten their act together and they need to get their transportation bills done, and they totally do. And I hope that they do. Again, I think if they choose to pass transportation bills at the state and federal level, it is likely that those bills will go to cover the state and federal needs. Our highway system has a D+ rating too. Our bridge system is a problem. Those aren't things that we can impact and control. What we can do is come up with a solution to face our own issues here as it relates to streets.
Under other options, I don't know, I think it was back probably in 2009, roughly, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They redid our street in front of our house. They assessed us so much money per foot of property. Why not use that? If the people that are going to have a new street should...
You can do that.
Well, but it's not up there as an option.
It's not, you're right. And we could actually add that bullet. Assessments. The question was about assessments. You can now, if you are not on our street plan, your street you want and your neighbors want to get that done, you can band together and choose to be assessed for that. We will do that for you. You will pay us for that.
When they did our street, the city just came in and did it.
And assessed you for it.
And assessed.
Yes. You were paying taxes or bonding and being assessed.
Exactly.
Yes, correct, correct. Yep. So those are all options. And the assessments that we use now, we are looking at our assessment system, actually, because it is complicated. And you have to prove that what you're being assessed is the equal value to what your property is benefiting from. So it's not an ideal system. Yep, you got a question in the back?
Where does the interest money go that was paid on the assessment if you did a payment plan? Where does that interest
That is a
go?
great question. I don't know it offhand.
It goes into the streets.
Does it?
Yep.
Jim says it goes back into the streets.
Yep.
That all of that goes back in. So the referendum for dedicated sales tax is before you on November 7th. And this is actually an outdated slide. So this was when we first kicked it off. We had 4 big public meetings planned. We've since added, and we announced this referendum in August. So over the course of 90 days, we are doing about 22 public meetings. Meetings like this, some of them are with business groups or church groups or civic groups, but a lot of them are this, where people can come and ask questions. So we have worked hard to try to get out across the city. We have one more like this planned. October 26th. But yeah, Jim and I have 3 or 4 more planned, I think, beyond that. So now I want to just open it up to other people's questions, whatever you may have. And before I do that, just let you know we've got this dedicated phone line. We have a website that does have a comment area. We have an email address that you can email us directly. On this website, we have frequently asked questions, and we brought some copies of those frequently asked questions in the back. I think it's about 7 pages worth of frequently asked questions that range from some of the questions you've asked tonight to other ones, right? Like, why do we have great trails and bad streets? I can tell you why. It's because the city made a decision several years ago to get outside dedicated funding that can only be used for trails and to use it for trails. The city made that decision. And what I'm proposing is we make a similar decision for streets. But there's a lot more detail about that in those frequently asked questions. So I'm going to start with people who haven't asked a question yet and then come back. Yep.
The expense of the street should also include more inspectors. A case in point, one of my daughters lives on South Blackman, and that was redone 2-3 years ago. And once the inspector went from point A to point D on the street, they would start at point A, they would start throwing in all kinds of material, and then they would compact it, where I think that many cases they're supposed to compact it every 6 inches.
That's correct, yeah. So comment was about inspection, and I would agree. We need to have good inspection on our projects, and we try. And if something got missed, it could have been a consultant. I don't know if it was a city-run project, but we do our best to have continuous observation on everything we do, because for an investment of $2.5 million, we want to make sure it's going to last the 50 years that we want to get out of this particular street.
Thank you for your comment. Yep.
The money that comes out of the property tax right now, is that dedicated
It
money?
is. It is. I dedicated that when we made the decision to put that from a fee into the tax. I dedicated that. The council confirmed that dedication. That dedication would continue. So that would, what you're currently paying would continue to be dedicated and added to with more dollars. Yeah?
So just on that other comment about assessments, do you think that this would make a positive, like a decrease in how people are assessed if, like, when their street gets done, that they would be assessed as much? And I actually live up in Woodland on West Anoka, and although I really appreciate that I can get to work because it's a snow or an emergency route, so it gets plowed. There's also a ton of commercial vehicles that I think are probably going to the golf course or other businesses that take my street, and so there's, you know, the traffic is like, it's not just your good old-fashioned residential traffic with garbage trucks doing, so it just seems like, I don't know, I'm just concerned of like how much I'd be assessed when that street, and although every single year gets patched, and then every spring I'm raking tons of asphalt out of my yard. So I don't know. I mean, it would be nice if maybe the assessments were cut, if they were able to with this be cut down a little bit.
Good comment. Yep. And then we'll come back to people who have asked questions.
Well, the legislation that you're going to put together, will that encompass everything so that allows you enough room to take care of reconstruction, all types, to make sure that you don't have anything that slips through the cracks? Because I think you're only going to get one chance at that. It should be all encompassing. That will fit your needs.
Yeah, the first comment that I didn't recap was about assessments and about a request to really review what our assessment policy is, what that looks like, especially if we get more revenue from here. And the second comment is about the legislation that gets put together. I mean, you're right, every word matters in legislation. And that's why we're already starting to work on it now, and we're working with the legal teams of the House and the Senate to make sure that things are matching. The comment was, both, how can you make sure that it will be locked in and dedicated for the uses that you need, but how can you also make sure that you don't miss anything? Because we're probably not going to get another chance at this, right? So how do you make sure you get it right? And that's where it's nice to know people who are a lot smarter than I am at that, because they are already working on that, and your comment's spot on. Question back there?
I guess I'd like to know if I completely understand that the funding that you get from the state, federal, county monies, and what percentage does Duluth have to cover that you don't get enough money from those other entities?
Well, so the question is, what's the percentage? For instance, state, federal, and county dollars go to work for their projects, and what is the funding gap for some of those projects, correct? So St. Louis County has fully funded, I believe has fully funded all of their projects that they have chosen to do. So the county has not asked us to contribute to their project. They have asked us to do our roads that feed into their project. The dollars we get from the state come in as kind of a blank amount of money. It doesn't come programmed per road. We get to decide how we want to program those dollars, but they're not enough dollars to take care of all of their roads, right? So the money that we get, we're augmenting some of those state roads with this $2.8 million that we're using from your property taxes to help get some of those state roads done. Do you have a more detailed answer you want to be able to give to that, or?
I think you hit it.
Okay.
In 2019, Mayor Larson mentioned that county is going to be doing Woodland Avenue. They'll be doing that from Cavalry Road down to Anoka. And I know that part of the funding from the city's end of that is the intersection at Cavalry Road. 20 feet off of Woodland, there will be a parking lot behind what used to be the cookie shop. And that parking lot area needs to have a curb and gutter around it. So if the county's doing Woodland right there, will save money. We'll have a good bang for our dollar if we have the funds available then. So that's where it's all those streets that are feeding into that Woodland Avenue project where the city's investment will need to be made.
Another question back there?
This one's for Jim. I understand you have to tear up the nice new road after a water main break. But why do you have to tear it up after 2 years when 2 houses are on the same sewer line going in? Why isn't that known before you dig it and go down deeper?
It's a good question. Everybody hear the question?
No.
So the question was, the comment was that occasionally we'll have to dig up a new street that has a broken water main under it. That's unfortunate. But what may be more unfortunate is when we have to dig up a street for a shared sewer service. So when sometimes there's 2 homes, they go together to a common service, and that goes to the sewer main. And when one of those fails, according to state plumbing code, they have to be disconnected in 2 separate ones.
Why wasn't that known before the new street was put in?
Because we don't know where they all exist. We usually don't find out.
They know what that scope coming up and check your sewer line to see if you have water leakage in your sewer line.
Correct, but there's...
So one of those has to be for every house on Tioga Street.
Some of the old...
But
more of a technical question, but some of those, the old sewer mains, when we televised those, they put in the Ys, that's the connection there, and they're in there for that property that didn't even connect to it. They had the foresight to do that, and all we do is we look up and we see that there's a Y there and it's not leaking. We don't know that it's not connected to anything. We move on to the next one, and that's the one where they're common. So it's, I wish we could tell.
There's 14 houses down there. There has to be 14 sewers coming into that sewer line.
But there could be 14 or even 18 of these connections. And some of those connections just go up 4 feet and then they're capped off. So 100 years ago when they were building the sewers, they said there's probably going to be a house here. we're going to put a Y in there, we're going to cap it off, and somebody can connect it into the future. So when we're televising, TV looks up, connection not leaking, move on to the next one. We don't always know that they're common and shared. I wish we could.
You have to know what that scope, but they can come right up and come right into my sewer line to see if I have a new sewer line in or not.
But some of those, they're capped off, further off. All you see is this connection, and you assume it goes to that house.
This is kind of along that line, because what happened on my street, I got the nice new street, all the infrastructure, I got the assessment paid, and then they came along and said, oh, you have to put in a new sewer line from your house to the middle of the street, and you cannot tear up the street, so you have to use this newfangled thing. You can do whatever you want out to the street, but then you have to use this newer system so that we don't have to tear up the street. That's what they told me.
That's correct.
They didn't tell my neighbors that. And so now this nice new street, all these little patches, because other people did it the other way, which is cheaper. And they dug up this nice new street.
It depends on what year that was. So we were going through the consent decree, and we had to line, we required people, many in Lakeside, to include myself, to line their lateral lines, the section of sewer that goes from your house to the main.
I didn't mind that.
And then about halfway through, we noticed that's like, oh no, we're tearing up all of these brand new streets. So about halfway through, we picked a date and time, and I think it was 10 years. If the street is 10 years or newer, we're not allowing you to dig in the street anymore. You can dig up to the street, but then you have to line that. So it depends on when your neighbors got.
It was all about the same time. It was really.
So the consent decree.
Yeah.
The consent decree was a federal lawsuit filed against the city of Duluth and WSSD to eliminate sanitary sewer overflows into Lake Superior. And this basin, this drainage basin of Lakeside Lester Park, for some reason, it's our clay soils, the topography, that's where we have the tanks. We've got the tank right down there, 52nd and Dodge, and that's why we had these programs. And this will be another discussion for another year. We're going to implement that program again because WSSD is now having a similar program for their district, and we're a part of that. The good news is we're way ahead of Proctor and Hermantown and Carleton County, but those grants for the lateral lines and the sump pumps continuing, but the grants for the lateral lines and the lateral line program is going to come up again.
John? I have a specific comment about that, and that's that a lot of our brand new sidewalks are getting undermined with those pumps that are throwing water out into the yards and creating pretty unsafe walking conditions on the sidewalks as well. I'm just saying that you probably have heard that before. There are a lot of us property owners, not everybody, but a lot of us property owners who would like to do something about that, and some of us have the means and the willingness to take that problem on ourselves. We could use some guidance in what can we do. So I'm not asking you to solve it, but I'm looking for guidance in how can I solve it.
So I've got a dedicated staff that all they do is sump pumps and lateral lines, and they're real good at finding solutions to these drainage problems. And one thing we can do moving into the future, when we do, if this does pass and we start up the full reconstruction program again, we put in a I&I line. It's like a little miniature storm sewer that people can connect their sump pumps directly into that. I know it was done on Oneida Street many years ago. So if you look at Oneida Street, you're not going to see a lot of water going directly over the sidewalk. It went underneath the sidewalk, connects right into there, goes down to the end of the block, and goes right into the storm sewer. So those are things that we can take into consideration. But if your existing problems, come see me after this. I'll give you a phone number, and I've got real good people that are good at looking for solutions, whether they can redirect it, put it to a different location in your yard, as long as you don't, flood out your neighbor's yard. That's the second biggest complaint besides the slippery sidewalk, is like, my neighbor's now flooding me out. So we can look at stuff like that.
As long as I have the floor.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. thank you for letting us decide.
Thank
I mean,
you.
I like that it's in our hands.
Good.
I appreciate that very much. So,
Thank you.
we use the streets. I get a lot of benefit out of the streets I use. I don't mind. We all should be paying more.
Well, and what I like is, thank you, John. And what I like is somebody may feel totally differently about it, and their vote is just as important and just as worthy and means just as much. And so thank you for recognizing. To me, making sure that you had the chance to make that determination felt really important. So we're to the part of it that's kind of my favorite, because it means that people are really thinking about, well, I want to talk with you about my street or this connection or this specific question that I have. So I want to give us some time to be able to talk with you individually, answer any other questions that you have, and I do want to honor the time that you've already given. Are there more kind of general questions on streets?
It's a general question.
Yeah.
And I echo what the gentleman just said. I do appreciate that you're doing this, you're going around and actually taking an issue that I wish local government would do on all kinds of issues. The cost. People think this stuff just comes off the tree and doesn't cost anything, and they all have costs and they're all choices. And just on the side, for someone who just is relatively new, been here a year and a half in Duluth, I personally don't think the roads are that horrible here. So there's someone from an outside
There's an optimist in the back of the room. I like this guy.
Go to Chicago and drive. It's a lot worse than the potholes of Chicago. I don't really see that many potholes here, and I drive a fair amount of the snow.
I think a lot of people would take you around, but thank you very much.
But anyway, I want to know, when you're saying to reconstruct whatever the road is, so I live in Tioga, so Tioga, if you're going to come in and do that, are you going to make it what it is, or are you expanding it? Because I saw, if you go down Cook, where Cook was redone, it made bigger. And so that's a problem with the general plan, because that means the next time around, or to keep doing the maintenance, that's proportionally higher to take care of. And I don't think that, there are some roads where maybe that makes sense. These neighborhood roads do not need to be any wider.
So when we get ready to reconstruct a street, we have very detailed pre-construction meetings while in the design phase, and we come by, this is what your existing street looks like. It's 20 feet wide, and with that, we'll rebuild it 25 feet or 20 feet wide, but you can't park on it. We understand you've probably parked on it in the past, but the fire code's not going to allow that. So there's decisions to be made. Do you want to park on that street? It's got to be a little wider. Do you want to park on Bull Stride? It's got to be a little wider yet. So we leave those decisions up to the people that actually live on those streets, and we don't dictate it, but we give you the options, and then you have to live with the consequences of those decisions.
Yeah. Okay.
Question here?
Yeah, and I'll echo what the gentleman in the backside. I've been here a little over a year myself. And Milwaukee streets are no better than the streets here. So first off, I mean, I'm not against what you're doing. All right, I mean, we did this in Milwaukee with Miller Park and God knows what else, right? So there's always a half a cent here and a quarter cent there, and you never really notice, you never really see it, you just pay it, that's all. Okay. Two things. One, I want to go back to your comment on, well, we're going to make sure that that money is all sewn up through legislation. Okay, legislation is as good and as solid as the legislators who put it together. You're not going to be here 25 years from now. The legislators in St. Paul aren't going to be here 25 years from now. In fact, 2 years from now, there's going to be new people who are going to say, well, we don't need that anymore, and I have a better use for these dollars. How are you really planning on locking it up?
The question is, how do you really lock it up? Because people change, right? And the question was specifically about legislatures can change too. In the same way that a mayor can change, that a city councilor can change. And I think theoretically, you're right. They could come in, they being the legislature, could come in and say, you know what, we're getting rid of all of these. That could happen. I feel like I watch our legislature pretty closely, and two ways in which I think this is different than that opportunity, because this is, first of all, voter-based, so it's going on voter inclination. And I do think that our legislature, maybe other legislatures as well, do want to honor the will of people on an issue of autonomy and self-taxation. So I think that that correlation is there. That said, you're right. I mean, they can take things away and they can add them. We have not had that experience with the city of Duluth, with different taxes that are in place. We have not had the experience that they've taken something away. We haven't had the experience that they have reauthorized or repurposed those. My experience and the experience like going back is I researched all of those taxes that we have. When did they come in? How did they change? What happened? I have not seen a change of application. Could it happen? For sure. Yes, it could. That is not the history of what I've seen so far.
Okay. And then part two of that. So you've got the dollars locked up. Assuming this thing passes, you're going to start an influx of dollars. I'm assuming that you are going to begin the updates to the roads based upon what you assume is going to come in for 2018, and you're going to do the same thing for 2019. You're not going to wait till there's $7 million in there and say, oh, now what do I want to do? Correct? Yep. Okay. So that being said, let's say it passes. You're going to want to start, let's say, January 1st. Okay. Is there a plan in place? I saw you had a whole list of, I'm going to start with the worst streets, and I'm going to just start one here and one here. If you're going to take my money, right, I want to know what streets you are going to do in year one. I want to know what you're already planning for year two, and I'd probably like to see year three as well. So is that put together? And if so, or if not, when will it be put together? And two, when will it be published?
Okay, great question, and I'm going to summarize it. How are you going to spend the dollars? Outside of this prioritization list, when do you put the streets list together for the next year or the year after that? Where can we see that? I want to know how the dollars are going to be used. And then you also kind of had a reference to that we anticipate sales tax, correct? So we project what we're going to get, and we start doing the project list based on that amount. That's the part of the kind of comment I want to address, and then maybe Jim can talk about the street list. So we do track sales tax very, very carefully, and we compare it year to year and years prior and project out. So we are actually very cautious on how we spend our sales tax, and we wait to see that come in. And there is always this risk that sales tax can go up and sales tax can go down. We have very conservative estimates, and we do track that really closely. So I just want to say that as it relates to sales, we have staff that monitor that very closely every month. Where is it at? How does that compare? How does it compare to last year, 2 years, 5 years ago? How is it growing? Where are those peaks? So that's a little bit how we watch it very, very closely so we can be accurate with that. Jim, do you want to talk about how we put the street list together, where people can find that? Yep.
So 2018 is already locked in, whether or not this passes or not, because we have to design streets a year in advance. We can't just draw it up on a napkin as we're going to go and build this and bid it. So we're designing our 2018 projects right now. If this referendum does pass, that would be applied to the 2019 projects, and it is premature for us to even speculate on what projects those are going to be. But we do plan on doing 15 to 16 miles if they do pass. Which ones they are, I don't know.
Okay, and I guess that's the crux of my question. When will you start to devise? I mean, I'm going back to my, I've been in the IT business field for over 30 years, right?
Yep.
I mean, I have 1-year plans, I have 3-year plans, I have 5-year plans. I mean, you should already know 3 years from now what streets you're doing, and 5 years from now.
We do have a 5-year plan, and year one is always solid. Next year, I can tell you what we're going to do. Year 3, pretty good. Year 4, not so much, because something's going to fall apart. I can't tell you what it's going to be. Water main problem that we've got to go redo this street. Something falls apart on the sanitary sewer, the example on Superior Street needs 34th. Anybody remember that detour from a couple weeks ago? So the water, no, not the water main, the sanitary sewer fell apart there and undermined the road. So now, we have to dedicate money for that. So 5-year plan, yes. How solid is it? It gets a little fuzzy at 5 years old.
Understood.
So, but depending on what happens with the referendum and with the legislature, we're certainly going to make plans going forward. And there will be 5-year plans. So is it going to be $3.8 million plan, or is it going to be a $10 million plan? Big difference there in what we can do.
When we have a list, Paku, we do put that out every spring, and we do a press release around that as well, so people know that.
And the city council, Councilor Anderson will vote on this along with his colleagues in a couple of weeks when we present the capital projects to the city council. Now you're going to see a list street by street by street, and I don't know why I can't remember, but I can't even give an example of what streets we're doing next year, but I know there's a bunch. There's a few we're going to do, and they're on a list, and the city council ultimately says, yes, this is what we want you to spend your money on.
So if you wanted to see that list, we could email it to you. It's a pretty large document.
Yeah, it's going to be on the Capitol City website, the Capitol budgets, I believe.
And great comments. Yep, I get it. Question here?
I know you just got done saying that you watch the sales tax budget really closely and are conservative about that, but what happens if we don't hit that estimated $7 million mark? Are we going to be cutting again in public services, or what's the plan?
No, because this would be dedicated only for streets, right? So this is the money we would be using for that. So we can always augment from other areas, but I mean, this would be the street plan moving forward. The existing dedication that we have, and then add into that the sales tax. So again, we have projected out that the $7 million is pretty conservative from what we see. It could be more. In fact, St. Louis County has seen actually that it is much higher than what they anticipated it would be. And I don't think it's realistic for us to be able to augment from the existing budget that we have. I just don't. I don't think we have it. And I don't think those are the cuts that people want to see us make further into some of those departments. So I hope that answers that question for you.
So basically, whatever that sales tax brings in is what we're going to use.
That's what we're using with the existing dedication and rolling that over. Okay, we're down to just a few more minutes, and I want to, any other first-time questions? And then you, sir?
You said you're not using money for bike paths. What about bike lanes?
Bike lanes. So this is really set aside for sidewalks and streets, first of all. I mean, that is really the priority. And what's in the list is bridges, sidewalks, streets, those kinds of things. But it's really sidewalks, streets. As it relates to biking and bike infrastructure, you will notice that 4th Street, the county project that they did, has a dedicated bike lane. It's not quite protected. It's a painted bike lane. It's got a little more width. You go further down to the street that we did on 4th Street, there is no bike lane. Even though it's on the bike path, it is on the bike plan that has been approved. But we didn't have money to build out the curbs and create bike space and to preserve the parking that was there. So when we have projects that they can be accommodated, we will do that. We are not going to prioritize that as part of how we're going to make some of those decisions. But when we have that curb to curb and it works, in the case of 4th Street on the county side, it works. Applying that same strategy to the city side had a whole different set of implications because we were sticking with the width that we were given. The county expanded their width and they went into the boulevard space and they did some bump outs. So their reconstruction really encompassed something much bigger than what it was that we could tackle on that side. So does that help answer that question?
So you will also, money will not go for bike lanes?
No. I mean, outside of just kind of the basic.
I just want to understand that, the difference between a lane and a path.
Yeah, right. Question?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and you hit on it a little bit, and I would love to hear more expansion. I realize we're running out of time, but the state and federal funding that you said is there, but not to rely on it. So I appreciate that as a community, we're making this decision on a local level, because that decision down at the state level is very difficult. You spent a lot of time in St. Paul fighting for a lot of things, and you know how difficult it is. Everybody's seen in the news how difficult it is, and those tax decisions about gas tax or tolls, all that's across the nation, that's going to be a long time coming. So I'm glad that we're kind of taking matters into our own hands. So thank you for that. I think that's good. And I too, I'll just echo in a few things here. I'm new to the area. It's been about a year and a half. I came from a place that had much better streets, but I also paid twice as much in property taxes every year. And that's a lot of money. And with the sales tax, you can make day-to-day decisions to say, I can reduce that amount, whereas a property tax, you're pretty well stuck with it.
That's right.
So.
That's right. So thank you for that context. We do strive to have lower property taxes here in Duluth. That you may not feel that, but when you compare us to other communities, and we do, I've looked at those spreadsheets, what are property taxes people are paying in Rochester, what are property taxes, and the proportion to the value of the property. A final thought on the sales tax as it applies in Minnesota, you don't pay sales tax on food and clothing. And that's one of the other reasons why this works. So it's really on the more discretionary spending, not totally discretionary, and I get that. But that is a little more proportional to the income you have to spend. In the city of Duluth, we don't collect a sales tax on new cars either, for instance. So some of those bigger ticket items that people kind of quickly jump to are not ones that would apply here. So the same things that are taxed now are the same things that would be impacted by this. There are not new applications happening. Yes.
First of all, I support this process. I've been a resident of Duluth for a long time. I've worked here both as an outsider, as far as government is concerned, and an insider. I've seen this issue and our infrastructure issues kick down the path for many, many years, and it's done nothing but cost us more money. I think this is finally a program where nobody likes taxes, but this provides us with an opportunity to finally come up with a realistic solution. I'm hoping that it goes well and that it's used properly and wisely as far as the projects that are selected, reconstruction versus rehabbing and things like that, but it's long overdue. And I applaud you for your effort.
Closing questions in the back there?
Does the street reconstruction include the cost for utilities, water, sewer?
Great question. Is that the end of your question?
No.
Keep going.
Well, if it doesn't, where do those costs come from? Or how are those costs covered? And if it does, are the costs for the reconstruction and even the resurfacing or whatever it's called, are those adjusted for inflation in these cost estimates that you provide?
Great question. So there were several questions in there. The first is, when we're talking about the cost of total reconstruction and how that goes all the way down, does that factor in the cost of the utilities? Is this going to pay for the cost of those utilities? And have these projected amounts that we've put on for what we need to do taken into account the cost of inflation, correct? That's the question. You're the answer man.
The answer. The street money pays for the street from the gravel, from where we cut on up. The utilities below that are paid for each respective utility. So if we've got a water project, that comes out of the water fund. If there's natural gas that needs to be done, natural gas, sanitary, storm sewer. So each one of those funds pays for their little piece of that overall project. But this money would just be for the driving lane, you know, the surface and the sidewalks. Does it take into account inflation? Not per se, but the 0.5%, you know, as inflation goes up, as things cost more into the future, unfortunately that's going to happen. That 0.5% is going to be a 0.5% of the more that things cost into the future too. So it is self-adjusting to a certain extent, yes.
So thank you. We have 10 more minutes in this space. I should have known this one would have gone all the way to the max. I love being here, and so thanks for having us. This has always been a really active and engaged community, this particular neighborhood, and I hope we have people from around the city here because these are open to anybody. But I really want to thank you for being here. This is a lot of time to give. I think you care deeply about this issue. However you choose to vote, I know you care, and that means a lot to me that you've taken the time to be here. And I have to tell you, we care a lot too. And if Jim and I could be moving around the city and having 20+ meetings on almost any other topic than asking you to tax yourself more, we would do it. So thank you for being engaged. We'll stick around a few more minutes.